Dr. Power, guests have arrived.
Oh, thanks, Bonnycastle. Hi, folks. Come on in and have a seat. This is session 7. We're, once again, I say, coming close to the end, and so glad you're able to join me again. Yeah, there's a seat over here. So glad you're able to join us today to have a little bit of a Snowcat session and talk a bit more. Let me talk first, if I can, about the space junk. I was pleased that some people picked up on that, and it's interesting just what's up 100 feet over, 100 miles overhead, and what's spinning around. And we talk about being environmentalists and concerned for the planet, and this garbage continues to be pumped out there, and nobody's really looking at it or controlling it or stopping it. So it was a nice discussion. I enjoyed that. Your assignment, paper number 2, Internet of Everything, Internet of Things. Love the papers, enjoyed them very much, enjoyed the read. It's a topic that's of interest to me because I believe in stealth mode. This is sweeping over us, a new industrial revolution, zero marginal economy, a collective commons. All these concepts and notions are included in here, and it's going to shift and rival capitalism to this new form of society that we're emerging into, and we're seeing evidence of it now, and looking at your papers. And I think, indeed, I suspect by now, having done one of these papers in one very narrow segment, you get some sense of what's coming. And it's in every segment. It's across the whole board. And I'm surprised about how many of my colleagues and how many people out there in the business section and business decision makers and political decision makers, I don't think really have got the sense of this wave yet that's coming. So if you can be a first mover advantage and harness some of that, more power to you as a strategist within your organization. I think it was Sarah, I could be wrong in the name, I think it was Sarah a while back, talked to me about glass ceilings and some of the concerns and how to deal with it. And I thought I might share a strategy that I've shared with my daughters, who are doing extremely well. And what they did, what we suggested would happen, is that within your organizations, this is just for women only, men you can turn off your radars for a minute, but for women only, what seems to work to me is that, let's say within a particular ministry, find yourself 3, 4, 5 up-and-comers, streamers, young women that really have a passion and really want to conquer the world, and form a very unofficial collective little group. Don't be seen as a group, don't talk about the group, don't call yourselves the Band of Merry Women or something like that, but you're very quiet in stealth mode and for all apparent purposes not really seen too much together, but you do have your meetings, and at particular meetings when something comes up and somebody says, who should we get for this project, you can say Mary Jane, and when Mary Jane gets the opportunity to recommend Betty Boop, then she says, well, I recommend Betty Boop, but you keep cross-promoting each other as good people within the organization. And it works so long as the folks at the table don't understand that you're planting and salting the mine, but you keep promoting each other, and by doing that and working offline with each other on strategizing how to promote each other and how to move forward, that cluster of 3, 4, 5 women will move faster in the organization than those that just try to do it on their own. So there's power and synergy in coming together and supporting each other, and it works. So that's one suggestion anyway that I have. Exams for information. I've finished the exam. There are 3 exams. The first exam is the main exam. That should be just about all of you that can write at the appointed date and time will write that exam, and for that exam it has its own unique case. There are 2 alternative exams, Alternative 1, Alternative 2, each with different cases. And so where I'm going with the conversation, that it's imperative that you confirm with your program office, if there's anything other than the regular exam, which exam you'll be writing, so you know exactly which case you should be preparing for. And as I said, not this Monday when you view this video, but next Monday, I'll be releasing for you on the first of the last week the actual case that you'll get for the regular exam, and the separate case for assignment for number 1 and another case for assignment 2. So there are 3 different cases involved in here, but I underscore the importance of make sure you get registered and you know what exam you're writing, which model, so you know which case that you get from me. I'll put all 3 out there, but you pick the appropriate case for your assignment. I hope that's clear. About that same time, I'll review with you the exam. There's no magic to it. Basically, it's divided in 2 parts. The first part is the short little snapper questions that are based on quotes or a position or a concept or a notion, Sun Tzu, something of that nature, or some article like we discussed out of the paper. And I just want to get some critical thinking, some demonstration based on what we've talked about in the course, in the discussion sites, based on what's in the text, based on the cases you've studied, based on your watching whatever you watched on the course site. then I'd like you to share with me some of your thoughts as to what that means. There are no right or wrong answers to this. Your answer on part one, question one, may be entirely different from the colleague sitting next to you and what they come up with, how they see that hand, and equal marks for both. What I'm looking for is the critical thinking, that how you can relate to the strategy course the concepts that come out of that particular quote or passage that I put in the section. And that's 50% of the mark, and I think we do 5. I offer you 6 choices. You do 5 of them, 10 marks apiece, evenly. Do a time will be your enemy, do a time appreciation, 90 minutes, do it, roughly a page, give or take a little bit, is all you have time to write, depending how fast you write, and essay format, and give me what you can give me. In the second part, it's just like you did on the practice cases, like you've done on your individual assignment. It's a case that you'll have ahead of time. I will not give you the questions, but the questions will be very, very similar to the questions that I've given you on the 3 practice and the individual assignment. Should not be surprised there is what the questions will be, and I encourage you to talk to your colleagues, get a sense of what they come up with as issues and things arising from the case, what models and tools they may or may not be using, some of their thoughts, get a sense of it, so when you go into the exam, it really should not be much of a shock. I can't imagine anybody failing this course, failing that exam, short of not showing up and not taking advantage to read the case ahead of time and talk to your colleagues ahead of time. So that should bring the temperature level down, but as I say, that Monday I'll actually send you those sample of one of those exams. I will take out the questions, I will take out the case that you have, but you have a sense of actually what the exam looks like, because it will be with the edits, removing the actual questions out of it. And I'll send that out to you a week from this coming Monday will be my intent, something like that. So that should be helpful. The final word on my mind, I think, is this assignment number 3 that you're seeing this on Monday, and I picked up then on the weekend on Sunday night they came in. So I've got roughly, 12 business days to get 70 plus papers marked, and each one takes me at least an hour, so you get some sense of time and motion to get it all complete, plus my day job, plus the other things that I'm doing. So I'll do my very best to have you have your feedback, and it'll be extensive on the case and how you did, and you can use that to get ready for the final exam. So I'll do my best to have them to you for the final Friday, the day we quit, to get them through. I'll do my very best to get them through for you. So that's that. In the paper today, let's talk. It's interesting. Today's paper is just full of France and war and bombings and one thing or another. So the whole front section is just festooned with those sort of stories. So I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time, but because again, I'm concerned more with the strategy. But there are things that we need to understand if we're going to craft strategies to come out of it. So the first story I see is France aims to build a united front, a coalition, and certainly the French and the Russians are bombing big time right now in Syria. It's interesting. France said they've now declared war, but it seems to me that's what they did when they started bombing Syria in the first place. But anyway, they've declared war, and they're now in a very pumped up mode. Of course, it doesn't hurt with the election coming up that he's got to be seen, Hollande is going to be seen as a strong leader for the French folks, because he's running a little behind as to keep his job. And he's suggesting, in fact, that the strong bombing down there, it seems to me, sends a message. The Russians are sending a message to America and others, NATO forces, the strength and power that's being revitalized over there. These 25 heavy bombers, well above the cloud level, doing some pretty good accurate bombing, carpet bombing of ISIS. In fact, over there they call them Daesh as a derogatory term, forces on the ground in Syria. And it certainly sends a message to the Americans, as it did on other occasions, that Russia has some clout. It's trying to restore the old balance of being representing as a global power and still can swing some weight. And the message is passed. France is talking about a united front, and nobody's got an answer for this thing. I'm not saying I have an answer either, but I certainly have thought about it, and I can see some support for that keep in mind that Turkey has a very large standing army, very, very large, it's the second largest in that area, that can put some boots and rifles on the ground big time if they wished. The Kurds are sitting with 150,000 people up in northern Iraq, and they've been doing a marvelous job fighting and holding ISIS at bay, and almost on their own. They want some weapons, want some supports, and we're giving them minimum weapons and supports, because the concern for us is that if we fully equip them and give them what they need, after this is over, a large part of Turkey, a NATO country, and and the Kurds want a Kurdistan in this, Kurd land in this area, and if we equip them, then Turkey's going to have a hard time taking those weapons away. The same sort of thing we saw after World War One and World War II with the Middle East and with the Arab nations. And so, in any event, we have the Turks there with large. We have the Kurds, 150,000 troops, trained, seasoned, doing a marvelous job, but need equipment. We've got Iran and Saudi, which Shia and Sunni nevertheless have come together on this issue, anxious to defeat these people that have been set up. You've got Russia, Yemen also joining, so it's actually ringed nicely with the help of NATO troops coming in as well. We could not more than contain, as Obama says, President Obama. I'm actually saying we could actually get in there and really make some differences if all that came to pass. If it didn't, if it was piecemeal and one thing or another, then probably we should stay out of it. But the idea of building a united front coalition of countries like that with a common interest, and they all seem to have interest aligned, at least for this task, there's no question there are issues outside that have to be dealt with. But if we could just sort of watertight compartments deal with this issue and bring this coalition of Russia and the Kurds and Iranians and Turkey and Yemen's, Saudis all together, it is possible that this thing can be restored. In any event, worth looking at. There's lots of transition going on over there, and certainly good for the industrial military complex. Supplies and weapons need to be bought. Prime Minister is going to put 69 new soldiers up in northern Iraq as trainers. I think that's the appropriate role for Canada. I admire him to have the courage to bring home the CF-18. He's calling back our 6 planes over there that have been bombing illegally in Syria and bringing our little planes back. I'm pleased with that. And I know it seemed to fly in the face because at the time this bombing took place, what's Canada's role in NATO, and should we be supporting brother NATO country, France? But I prefer to see the technical, the boots on the ground side of the source and withdraw these fighting planes, 6 of them, which is minuscule, back out of the fight. But I have to say I like what Trudeau was doing on most fronts. This caused me some consternation today. In Toronto, there was a teenage Muslim girls in northern Toronto from a mosque. They can't let them walk down the streets at night because they're being picked on by folks like you and I. And I think we have to understand here that Christians can't be judged by the Ku Klux Klan. No question. There's a core of folks within the Christian community, and I'm going to grab the Ku Klux Klan as a sample of that, and you can't judge all Christians by that. And you can't judge all Muslims by these Islamic terrorists, fundamental terrorists. You can't judge all Muslims, and particularly Canadian Muslims. They are Canadian. Like, I'm Irish, they're Muslims, but we're all Canadians. And so I'm going to urge you as leaders, as Canadian leaders, as Canadian business decision makers, as folks about to get your MBAs, you have a duty not just to be silent and not do any damage, but you have a duty to get out there and say something positive, it seems to me, to speak for those that don't speak or don't quite understand the issue. But we're going to go right down a rabbit hole here if we don't. It'd be like Kristallnacht with the Germans and the Jews in the Second World War, that if we don't speak up when they come for the Jews, then who's next? And the same thing here, that if we allow our Muslim Canadian colleagues to get bullied and polarize us and to balkanize us and fractionize us into separate clusters of people, that's just not appropriate. So I urge you to say something, understand that we do recognize that there's Islamic terrorists and they have to be dealt with along the lines we just talked about, but Canadian Muslims are Canadians and they need to have our protection, and we need to speak for them because it's hard for them to speak for themselves. So I encourage you to do a little bit of that as you go forward in this. And again, it impacts strategy. I mean, if we balkanize our country, if it brings down our productivity, if we cease to be a united vertical mosaic of Canada, then it seems to me that we're all going to be diminished. So anyway, enough of that. In fact, again, I was struck by the carnage over there at the concert, and like fish in a fishbowl, just getting shot by these folks. And it seems to me it was Rousseau. There's a number, but Rousseau, political theory, talks in terms of a social contract, that you and I join the state of Canada, and we have this social contract, this agreement with the state, that we surrender certain runs of our rights that we're born with, to the state in return for the state doing a bunch of things for us, but primarily is to protect our real estate, our property, and to protect us. And that's the contract. And if the contract is breached, if the state fails to take care of us, as it did in France, then it seems to me we have a right then to take that back and have self-defense. We are allowed to carry weapons for self-defense. If the folks at that concert hall, not everybody necessarily, but I mean, I appreciate you need sort of, as an old retired military fellow, I'd say retired military, retired police officers, people who've actually taken the courses and been trained. I have no problem with them doing an open carry and going and carrying a weapon. Certainly there would be less carnage at these sort of events, and schools in particular, when nobody in the school's got a gun and they just walk down the halls. We need some folks that are trained and have them. But that's a personal thing to talk about, but I believe that the social contract gives us the right to carry weapons when it's breached. We could talk about that this week if we wanted. NDP, this is in the province of BC. It may not have impact on all of you, but we have, and I've been talking about this Site C hydro dam that's being built, flooding wonderful farmlands and valleys to supply energy to California primarily. And the NDP leadership said if we're elected, we're going to roll that back and cancel it. It's a $9 billion project. And the election's coming up in about a year and a bit. And that's one of the first things they're going to do is to roll that back if elected. But it talks in terms of what we talk about in this course is Internet of Everything. The idea that what are the capital costs, this $9 billion? And when are you going to recover that back? And if we're right that by 2025, alternate energies are going to start coming on stream in a very meaningful way, does it make sense to be putting these pipelines and these sort of investments and flooding the lands like this, or should we start now taking that same $9 billion, and there's only 5 million BCers, take that $9 billion and allow us, subsidize us to put solar power panels on our roof along with the Tesla batteries, and allow us to drive that back into the energy grid and bring the cost of energy down, allow me to build up a credit for the times I want it. And I appreciate that there's a peak periods and low periods, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and how those can be resource leveled a little bit too. But I just have this concern that one, that yes, it's an interesting that this major project may be canceled, but the other side of that, of course, is that I'm not sure the capital costs warrant those sort of expenditures any longer. And I just wonder if they're looking at the Internet of Everything and looking out in front as what's coming down the road and coming at us quickly. This was interesting. Researchers develop a blood test that only needs a single drop. Again, the Internet of Everything. And the nice thing about it is it was the University of Victoria, doing some other work with some other folks, have brought out this test. And it's being used currently by the Mayo Clinic, which, as you know, is one of the best clinics in the world in the United States. And they use the test for thyroid cancer, and they said thyroid cancer, and said it works very well. And basically, it's one little drop, a pinprick, that goes on to a piece of like litmus paper, and they can do 25 tests on that. But it's just one baby step from there to a wearable watch or strap that we can wear, and we can be tested almost hourly with just one little pinprick, just a tiny drop, for 25 tests, all done by computers. Which what does what? An Internet of Things. Again, that cuts out all these clinics that you go in and get a big gallon of blood, take out 2 or 3 vials from you. All those folks out of a job. I can do this little wearable and send it digitally straight through to my doctor's office, to 25 tests, and I can do it with frequencies daily. Diabetics, daily can be done. So, Internet of Everything, good research thing. We could talk about the new medical research that's coming through there. So that whole section of the paper was basically about war, so we're not going to talk about that. Let's talk about some business stuff if we can. Certainly gold continues to drop. Oil today was just marginally under $40 a barrel for a brief half an hour today, and then went back up slightly over $40. But certainly since we've started this course, we've seen it come down from $46 to today $39 and change, and it closed today at about $40.60, I think. But the pressure's on oil coming down, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Canadian Pacific Railway, we talked last week about the Norfolk Southern coming together, watch for the cultural clashes, and the idea that value chains have to be looked at, and by now you know you have your 2 value chain tools, watertight compartments, and you compare each compartment with the other firm you're buying's compartment to see where the advantages are, where the weaknesses are, and that gives you some sense of what you can jettison, throw over the side, and you can lever and get the benefits of the best of both bits of the puzzle and snap together by doing a value chain analysis. We have to watch out on this sort of thing, that it's not about ego, that the Canadian Pacific just doesn't want to grow. There has to be synergy. 2 plus 2 equals 5, not 2 plus 2 equals 4 when they do the value chain analysis. And it seems like they've done that. But it occurred to me that the reason they're doing this, of course, that if you look at the actual lines of Norfolk Southern, it's just that. It's the southern states, which takes you down to Mobile, Alabama, and right down to the coast line down below where all the refining plants are. And so with the Keystone Pipeline dropping the other day and being rejected, it seems to me it's logical then for CP, recognizing the opportunity that more oil is now going to travel by oil tankers across the land, because they're going to get there one way or the other. What a marvelous way to grab this asset that's undervalued. And now it's going to be pumping the oil through oil cars down through the northern Southern Railway right down to the refineries. So it's just another way to move the Keystone Pipeline oil, and CP are moving quickly to pick up the asset to make that happen. I could be wrong, but I think that's what's happening. This is going on. Oh, Enbridge. Yeah, there's a glut of oil. Canadian pipeline companies are starting to feel a pinch from oil slumps. Enbridge has cut 500 more full-time jobs. They left another 100 positions unfilled. The TransCanada Corporation have cut 1/5 of its senior folks have now been let go. And the paper is just festooned with cutbacks, particularly in the prairies and Alberta in particular, as we go on. This is interesting. Trudeau shouldn't dither on the pipeline plans. And you recall this is all about the Keystone Pipeline, and it went on for years and years, and our American friends didn't want it. But now I think they're not going to get it now anyway, because Trudeau comes to the table with more of an environmental bias than, let's say, Prime Minister Harper had at the present time. And so we're going to have a hard time getting pipelines across lands with the sensitivity of our new Prime Minister, and that may well be good, because again it goes back to this: what are the capital costs to run a pipeline for 10 years if in fact we're going to be doing some alternate energy and other ways to do that. In fact, Trudeau government is going to ban oil tanker traffic on the BC coast. Well, if that's the case, then this northern pipeline is, even if the First Nation said now you can have it, it's not going to work, because those tankers won't be allowed to come down our coast. So the northern pipeline is dead. They can go to Atlantic Canada and go the eastern route for energy, but it appears coming to BC coast is over with. And what does that mean then to BC? Because we're relying heavily on the LNG plants and these sort of initiatives for the recovery of BC and our revenue. So Premier Christy Clark would be very disappointed to hear that sort of news, that the pipeline and all the work it would make may well be dead. And so we'd look at that. C-Series, Bombardier's finished their test flights. I think it's a dead man walking situation. They said by Christmas they may have it finally approved for sales. We'll see what happens. Manulife, I like Manulife, and Sun Life are two nice ones. Manulife, anyway, I like very much as a company, and they're getting more into tech, Internet of Everything, and they're looking now at sending out insurance products that use fitness trackers and new phone systems with voice-acted data as passwords to send information back and forth. But they're also moving heavily now and trying to catch up with and make sure they have the new financial technology that's entering into the financial sector, so they can compete for consumers to manage their investments, and small businesses can apply for loans. They're getting into that business in a big way and using technology to make it happen. Again, no surprise for us. Fighting over the forest is now routine in Canada-U.S. relationship, and we've had a lumber debate, lumber feud going on here for 15 years with our American cousins, and it stems from how we calculate the stumpage fees. That in the States, the timber is owned by timber owners. They buy the land, they take care of the land for 15, 20, 30 years, grow their trees, pay their taxes, etc., etc. And in Canada, the lumber business simply goes to the government and puts a bid in on a particular quarter or two of the lumber, and pays what's called a stumpage fee. What's the cost per how many trees on it, and the costs are significantly less than all the capitalized costs and operating costs that a farmer would have in the States raising trees that way. And so they say it's an unfair subsidy that we've been fighting over. And on many occasions, we have won when it comes to the dispute settlement thing for NAFTA, which it comes under, as well as the World Trade Organization. We went to that court as well. We have had very positive feedback and win, but the Americans, they're not doing it. But in this case, in reading this article, it's not just Canada, but they're doing it for Australia, they're doing it for Portugal, they're doing it for Indonesia, and they've had a 21-cent, we've had like a 21-cent slide plus in the value of our dollar against the Americans, so it gives us a great competitive advantage in selling our lumber to Americans, and the Americans can't compete, as well as these other nations. So what they're doing is going around the obstacle saying, well, we can't put up tariffs and barriers necessarily, but we can put up administrative barriers. And I think I shared with you at one point, the fun one in my life was the tulip bulbs coming into Japan, and they're even though the World Trade Organization said you can trade tulip bulbs free back and forth, the Japanese decided, yes, you're right, bring them in, but we've got to do an administrative test here to make sure they're healthy so as not to destroy our tulip industry. And so they proceeded to cut every bulb open at the customs place to make sure there was no disease in it. So they used administration to achieve the same end. And the same thing's happening here, that the American dollar is so strong against these other currencies, they're trying to find ways to counterbalance that. And so we could talk a bit about that. Canadian consumer confidence surges in the last 8 weeks with Trudeau, and that's wonderful. That means that people feel better about themselves, about the jobs, about Canada's future, and that in turn tends to become reality. So well done for that. That speaks well. Maybe the Canadian dollar will start moving up. This story caught my eye for a minute, that the men out there will know about Viagra, and when it first came on the market in 1998, within the first month, there was over 500,000 prescriptions. 500,000. The women's equivalent has just come out on the market, and ADDYI, it's called, by Valente Pharmacy International, and the number there in the first month is 227. So there's a message in there, I guess, for us guys. I thought I'd raise that, a little sense of humor, I suppose. Next, regulate, article in here today about, again, on the financial side coming together, the technical side, and the need to take care of it. And there's a movement afoot. In fact, let me start here first and say that here they talk about Canada was the first to regulate the industry, to put some license in on governing digital currencies, Bitcoin, things of that nature. And the minute we did that, it said overnight we drove away hundreds of millions of investment dollars that were in the industry, left Canada and went to Britain instead. So we have to be careful that this regulation has to have universal application, because if one tries to lead the way, then like water, business always goes around the obstacle to find the lowest bunch of barriers. So they'll go to places where there's not a workman's compensation board, where the wages are low, where there's no red tape restrictions to business. Business moves that way. There's no allegiance to a particular nation of that nature. So having said that, we get into this idea of let's regulate the financial industry in total. Let's talk in terms of the Internet of Everything and digital currencies. And they're advocating digital currencies. Europe is leading the way in some of that to bring it. And with it comes a bag of things we need to think about for a few minutes and understand they've already got in Europe, as we speak tonight, they have a digital currency in place in some areas, and they actually have a negative interest rate that they actually charge you to put your money on deposit with the bank, a point and a half, just for the privilege of leaving your money in the account. They have the ability to freeze money. Part of the idea, any suspect that for whatever the sky is blue, or you're a terrorist, or suspect of being a terrorist, or on the no-fly list, they can freeze your account once it's digital very quickly and find out where it's all coming from. The idea of recall the Cyprus and Greece, when things went sour, the money in the bank belongs to the state, as we found out, up to, in I think the Cyprus case, $100,000. After that, the state felt they had the right to take your money and give you some sort of an IOU or something of that nature, but to solve the state's problem, the money became theirs in Cyprus and in Greece. Canada looked at that and backed off, putting that sort of law in place, but it only takes a stroke of a pen to have it here in Canada. And so these are concerns, it seems to me, that we have for this. The Bitcoins is another thing. And is it a Trojan horse? Is it I mean, can you imagine the danger of all that in there, that you won't be able to use your money? I mean, the state could get in and close your account for whatever reason. Um, so another story would be the U.S. targets, the federal prosecutors in the States are going after the Royal Bank of Scotland, J.P. Morgan Chase, for selling those flaw mortgage securities, those things that brought down 2008, the fiscal crash. They're going after British targets, these same federal prosecutors. But it's interesting, they haven't gone after any American firms that this thing all started from. So it doesn't seem appropriate to me that they're spending their time prosecuting British banking systems, and while they step over the Americans that did some of this. KFC are talking about home delivery, not so important. Iran adds, that's interesting, Iran adds 500,000 barrels of oil Tuesday to its existing production. It has the ability to produce, as I recall, 3.1 million barrels a day in total is what it can produce. Before all these sanctions kicked in place, they were producing about 2.1, 2.2 million barrels a day, and today they're producing 1.1. So they've got a 50% increase on exports possible, and the first of that extra million barrels a day they've just announced they're putting into play. So what we're saying here is that when they get back up to their old levels of 2.2, currently 1.1, that's $1 million more a million barrels more per day of oil coming onto an already glutted market share. And it's clear the price of oil has to go down, subject to, of course, some sort of a crisis on the choke points in the Middle East. If those shipping choke points got hit, then of course all bets are off if this thing blows up into a proper fighting war. But at the present time, I just see more barrels of oil coming on the stream. At the same time, we see more alternative energies coming on the stream. Folks that talk in terms of $65 barrel oil still haven't convinced me. I'm still holding for $35 a barrel, but that's another indicator. Iran's coming out with some more. U.S. inflation turns the corner. Consumer Price Index, 2 straight months. They think they've got some evidence that inflation is firming in this around 2%. It's holding there, and therefore the Feds, we expect in December, will bump their interest rate up 1/4 point, which it's symbolic. It doesn't make a big difference, but they bump it up 1/4 point. At the same time, the European Union drops down 1/4 point. Thereby, more competitive advantage goes to the Europeans in selling their product, and it's even harder now, like we just talked about a moment ago, for the Americans to sell their product because the cost of business just got 1/4 point more expensive. It's not the end of the world, but it sends a hard message out there that we'll watch for that in December. And of course, the payments on their own debt goes up by 1/4 point, which is a costly thing. Walmart store traffic rises. There's a lot more people shopping there. Bell Media is cutting a bunch of jobs. No surprise there. This was innovative, called a hydrosistor. It's a bundle of energy under Lake Ontario, and maybe I can show it to you. But it's this little picture here. And basically what you're looking at here is the idea that they're simply going to have take electricity during the low period when electricity is cheap and put it through a compressor that compresses the atmospheric air down, pump it through tubes into these weather balloons that were already made out underneath the Lake Ontario, quite a distance out, deep under, so you have the water pressure around the balloons. They compress, pump it up, blow up the balloons, get a sizable size, and they store it in these balloons, air. And then as needed during the high pressure areas, they allow the weight of the water to come down, collapse this, push the air back up through the system, drive the generators around, and during the peak periods, they can bring in this low-cost energy back, and they feel that on balance, it's saving some money and it supplies them some energy, so they can store energy that way. An interesting thought, but it's up and going. Another innovative energy storage project is unveiled, this time by Ryerson University, and here they're using lithium batteries that, again, almost in every lamp pole, that they have the ability during the off-peak hours to charge up the batteries a little bit, and then when they need to peak, it goes back in. So just another way to use the peaks and valleys that there's a problem for the hydro companies, and how to adjust the amount of infrastructure to accommodate the peaks and valleys and get the right appropriate balance. And again, I encourage solar power panels as one of those things. What else have we got here today? Oh, this is interesting. Oil tycoon Pickens, T. Boone Pickens. He's a corporate raider. Watch him as a few others. The Bass brothers in Texas and a few others go around, and they see a weak company that's got a lot of assets but being poorly managed. It's not unlikely they may show up and start making a run at the company, and they win either way. Just by making a run at the company, the stock they buy has gone up. Then if the company fails or their deal fails, they still get to make some money doing it. If they stay in, then they get the company with the assets. And T. Boone Pickens is one we should watch as strategist. He's done some good things, and much like Buffett, we watch what they do and maybe follow on their coattails a little bit. But he's selling Suncor, and we've said in this class, Suncor to me is the quintessential oil company out in Alberta right now. It's doing well, it's acquiring assets, it's leaving its advantage while the market is down. And so Pickens is getting out, and that should be a flag to us, because when insiders or somebody like Boone's hops out for some reason, then maybe it's a sign that it's there's just too much support for Suncor. Maybe it needs to be a little bit of the air let of it. Maybe that's what he's sending the signal, but we'll watch for that. A lot of people are reacting to the new finance minister, Bill Morneau, who's talked in terms that he's going to talk in terms of higher taxes on certain things to include options that people have. And so a lot of people now are trying to exercise their options ahead of the November 15th date. Before he said that on November 15th, but before he actually passes it in the House, they're trying to get rid of their stock options to get the tax at today's rate before it bumps up under the new budget, I suppose, will be coming out shortly. Hedge funds are cutting the U.S. stock exposure. They think that a lot of the U.S. stocks are a little too high, and so they want to ease back on their positions. And that should be a message for us too, that we watch these things as strategists and our businesses. I think the last article that I'll touch upon here, if I can, is a new book put out by Jeffrey Pfeffer, P-F-E-F-F-E-R, Papa Foxtrot, Echo Foxtrot, Foxtrot, Echo Romeo. Jeffrey, he's from University of, where did I see him? University of Stanford Graduate School. Put out a book, and the book is entitled Leadership Bullshit. And so it's an interesting book, but what he's coming out with, he's saying simply that he calls for leaders, most graduate schools, and probably the courses you've taken here, talk about good attributes for leaders are things like modesty and truthfulness and trustworthiness, and some others. And he says sometimes, but not always, it's doing precisely the opposite of that is what you have to do as leaders. And he talks about the lasting thing a leader needs to be at crucial moments is authentic. In touch with feelings and that. He says you got to act actually what the situation needs as opposed to being authentic. He says Jim Collins suggests in Good to Great that leaders need to be humble. But he said often confident people achieve higher social status and respect and influence by anything but being humble. Many points Donald Trump as an example. My point is that it seems to be whatever you've been taught in the leadership courses, if you read this book, you may find a countervailing answer to it. And in this class, we say that's fine, just dump it all on the table and sift it and decide which terrain you're happy to stand on. But it's an interesting view of the hand that seems to be juxtaposed to the conventional teachings. And it's an interesting little book. And it's put out by Harper Business, 258 pages. Folks, I think we've covered most of that then today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. Here for any time. Give me a call if you need me. And I'll be slogging hard trying to get your papers done. Bye now.